Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to What's Up with Technology and Data. I'm Jill Pearson, and I will be the moderator for this session. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the Fall Forum SharePoint page next week. Please keep your microphones muted when not speaking, and also use Slido for presenter questions or comments during the Q&A portion. To use Slido, just get out your smartphone or tablet. Open up a web browser, go to www.slido.com and enter event code #TechData. And that's it. And so you're able to submit questions and vote. So today it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First is Denise Whitney Dahlke. She is the Strategic Data Program Manager and the chair of the new data steering team. She implements technology and data governance and helps improve cross-organizational data development, management, and coordination, and literacy. Next is Thomas Amato. He works in information systems and is the enterprise technology manager. His teams are responsible for managing ODOT's network, server, and client infrastructure services, and our information security and customer support function. Next is Mark Sauer. He is our Chief Information Officer who is responsible for establishing and executing agency-wide information systems and technology strategy development. He ensures its alignment with the agency's business strategy and statewide enterprise goals. And last but not least is Jerri Bohard, who is our Policy, Data, and Analysis Division Administrator. Her responsibilities include managing the programs of Statewide Investments Management Section, Statewide Planning Section, Research, and Transportation Data. And with that, I will hand it off to our first speaker.
Go ahead and go to the next slide, Sally. So first, on behalf of the presenters, I wanted to thank Jill Pearson and Sally Ridenour for managing our breakout session this afternoon. Mark, Jerri, Thomas, and I are going to be sharing information about the larger industry and state context for tech and data, agency functions and priorities and how they relate, the changes we've begun putting in place, and how all this helps you to be more effective, as well as answering some of your questions. Next slide. So our world is changing. I mean, in addition to those of us that are telecommuting, full-time or nearly full-time now, we have the addition of new agency functions such as the tolls program, expansion of existing areas like the road use charge program, and industry changes, including connected vehicles and infrastructure, all of which mean our reliance on and the complexity of technology and data flows in our work are increasing. This diagram illustrates the myriad of technologies in play and potential data flows from the endpoint to the edge or core and back. And of course, this isn't comprehensive, right? There's a lot of other things that could happen here. Next slide. In addition, go ahead and click through, Sally, until all three pieces are up. In addition, there are changing expectations for agencies coming from the state level. Jerri and I have been working with the State Chief Data Officer, Catherine Helms, on the overarching Oregon data strategy, the Open Data Standard and related technical standards manual for the new statewide open data expectations that became law after the 2017 legislative session. One more click, Sally. And a state data governance policy. And then Mark is going to share with you some of the state level technology related issues.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of efforts at the state level to deliver and standardize services across the state. We are leveraging significant cost efficiencies by maintaining most of our information systems at the shared state data center. In a similar fashion, EIS is working to improve and standardize the statewide security program. While EIS focuses on securing the technology infrastructure, the perimeter and things like that, ODOT maintains responsibility for information security programs, internal and data security as well. The state has placed a priority on modernizing applications across the state. ODOT is working in cooperation with state efforts to identify and replace applications that are built on outdated technology, both platforms and code. A shift towards commercial off-the-shelf software as a preference requires more effective governance and a careful look at the skill mix of our technical staff. Improving our project transparency helps ensure that our investments are realized and ensures that we can manage to expectations. We are building partnerships with suppliers to leverage improved procurement processes and speed delivery to achieve business outcomes. Finally, the state recognizes the power of the cloud, and the state is working to ensure that we have a framework for understanding when to leverage the cloud to realize efficiencies, improve access, manage complexity, and leverage new capabilities. Probably the most visible effort on this is the move to the from on-premise Exchange in Microsoft Office to the cloud. The state is working further to centralize Microsoft 365 services to realize those cost efficiencies and to improve the service delivery. Next slide, please.
It's my turn to talk a little bit about planning. So as the planner, I guess I get to do that. But just a reminder that we've been working on this for a while. So if you think about our strategic business plan, which the commission approved back in April of 2018, and there were 4 pillars to that. But 2 of them in particular, I think that were important to the work that we're doing right now. Obviously, optimize and modernize technology and data. And you really heard Mark talk a lot about all the changes that are happening from a technology standpoint. And a large part of this from the data standpoint is that even prior to the strategic business plan, we have a data strategic business plan, and we've been working to implement that. So conversations around what does a data catalog look like? Those types of things have been going on. And with now the data steering team, which you're going to hear about, and then the technology steering team also thinking about how do they prioritize projects. So this has really been, this business plan is very internally focused, and obviously the governance conversation, which you're going to hear more about from, I think, Denise and Thomas in just a little bit, all the work that we've been doing to frame the governance conversation internally. It also impacts what we do externally with our partners, and more importantly, as we think about what the governance structure overall is for the agency. So what you're really seeing, I think, is a theme with regards to the importance of technology and data for our agency. Now, while these 2 really highlight the 2 of the pillars, the other 2 pillars around workforce and strategic investment are equally important to tech and data. So we recognize that as part of our internal work, we're going to have to think differently about what are some of the skills that we want our staff to have as we move forward in the future. And it's going to take investment by the agency in order for us to move forward on technology. So the strategic investment isn't just about our projects. So that's a little bit of the internal focus. And on the next slide, excuse me, Sally, hopefully many of you heard this conversation yesterday morning from our assistant directors talking about the strategic action plan. That is really a joint effort between us and the commission. And hopefully our commission will be approving the strategic action plan at their October meeting. I think what's really key when you look at this, you see the 3 priorities, you see a little over a dozen goals, and what's going to be in the plan is some implementing actions. That embedded in almost every one of these is tech or data being important to that. So even though you see under modern transportation, the very last goal, which is about innovative technologies, really that's a theme throughout. So when you think about what's going on in equity, we're going to have to think differently about the data we collect around demographics, how we analyze that. We're going to get different types of questions that we need to be answering around equity. Certainly it's going to be true around climate and the work that's going on there, whether we're talking about how we measure GHG emissions and the data that we need for that. And you can go into preservation and stewardship. So even though the strategic action plan is really talking about some of our new initiatives and not the core work that we do, the core work is in preservation and stewardship, a lot that's going on there. We're thinking differently about how we collect data around assets, certainly the work that goes on in project delivery, taking advantage of new technologies, allowing us to be more efficient. And then finally, with sufficient and reliable funding, a theme that's probably in much of the work that we do when you think about tolling, when you think about road use surcharging, and we're looking at technology differently. So the future of the agency is going to look different because of technology and data. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to the next speaker. And the next slide.
Thanks, Jerri. Hi, everybody. So I'm here to provide just a little bit of a historical perspective. We've talked already about governance and prioritization. I'll be talking more about that later. And also things like agency plans and statewide plans and how they factor into things. And that all sounds good, but what evidence do we have that we actually do have a need for a better and improved governance structure other than things that just sound like good ideas? So back in the 2018-19 timeframe, we did a pretty significant series of engagements with Gartner, and we had them evaluate our application infrastructure and how we spend our time. And with the results that came out of that, what Gartner did is they took our intelligence that we had on our applications and they sort of evaluated them based upon business value and technical value. So things like how effective are these applications? How critical are they? How easy are they to use? And what's their age? And how well do they perform? And how secure are they? And are they good at integrating with other applications? And then they take those applications and put them against what's called a time framework. And the time framework stands for tolerate, invest, migrate, and eliminate, replace. And those words mean pretty much what you think they mean. There's more technical definition underneath, but they mean what they mean. And what you want to be doing is investing in those applications that are good and get you good business value. And you want to figure out how to modernize or eliminate applications that don't. And so looking at that chart there on the left-hand side, what you'll see is that approximately 63% of our portfolio, and this was not every application, but it was a very good representative sample of the applications inside ODOT, about 63% of our applications ended up in the eliminate or migrate / modernize buckets. And that is essentially debt that we need to deal with. And when we took spending figures for those applications, we realized there was pretty much a normal distribution on spend across those boxes, but that isn't right because we should be spending more on the applications we should be investing in and less on the ones that we should be eliminating. Potentially for the migration ones, yes, you would spend more on those, but our spending is sort of out of whack also, but these applications provide necessary functions for us. We also found that there was a lot of duplication, around 16% of duplicative functions across our portfolio, and that 19% of our application portfolio didn't really provide a lot of the core functions it was supposed to provide, or provided those functions very poorly. When you look at the right-hand side of this chart, this is sort of another view of the same sort of problem. We evaluated how information systems spends their time, and there's lots of things that we do where we're very efficient and we do a very good job. But when we talk about the kinds of functions we do to support the agency, 98% of the work that we perform could be categorized simply as keeping the lights on. It doesn't mean that we're just spending time maintaining old applications. It could mean that we're deploying another application, but it doesn't really stand up a transformative service for the agency. And that's a lot of time, and a high percentage of time, I should say. And that box is always going to be a high percentage of time. And it's, unless you're, like a fintech company or something like that, this is probably where you're going to be spending the majority of your time. But relative to our peers, we were even above that. When you compare us to our peers, we were 15 or 14% spending more of our time on that function, leaving very, very little time for doing anything transformative. So that's a little bit of a history lesson. And when you think about how we got here and where we're at, it's probably because we have had traditionally a very siloed approach to how we authorize our projects. And our service deployment methodologies have been very siloed. And you combine that with our very laudable ethos of we get things done at ODOT, this is how we end up where we're at. And so what the new governance processes are going to do for us is they're going to help us get focused on how we're going to modernize our application portfolio, and then it's going to help us live within our means and make sure we're doing the right things for the right reasons going forward. And with that, I will close and we can move to our next speaker.
Sorry. So the agency invests a lot of dollars in staff to resource our information systems branch and our data analysis organization. But aligning the efforts of those organizations to ODOT's business needs requires a coordination process. We have been working to modernize that governance structure from the communities of interest to the new structure that brings representation from all areas of ODOT business into the process of informing, coordinating, standardizing, and prioritizing our efforts to ensure alignment with the business initiatives and priorities. We recognize that the technology and data are closely linked, but there are some differences in where we are standardizing and managing data versus prioritizing and sustaining technology. For this reason, we have established steering teams focused on the unique challenges of tech and data. These teams are intended to provide that first level of coordination and alignment to share information, initiatives, and needs that form strategies to solve business challenges, establish action plans, and set standards and guidance. The Technology and Data Council helps to advance efforts to align our tech and data strategies and action plans. The council helps to connect the business strategy of the ALB with the operational alignment of the steering teams. Effective governance means our tech and data teams hear and understand business priorities, their needs and partner to set standards and priorities. Business groups understand technology and data challenges, constraints, and partner to establish priorities, define business processes, and set the expectations. Governance is a team effort. Next slide, please. So the CIO and the Chief Data Officer play a coordinating role in our respective organizations, and therefore play a coordinating role as leaders in the governance structure for both the steering teams and the Tech and Data Council. One of the core responsibilities of the CIO is centered around maintaining strong governance, governance and alignment of ISB's efforts to meet business priorities. We are also working to increase transparency on projects, as well as tracking the work which is required to maintain the 470 plus enterprise applications over their life cycle. There are a lot of pieces to maintaining and delivering information technology services, but in the end, our success comes from our people who strive to deliver systems, software, and services to all of ODOT that supports the needs of our teams to maintain the state's transportation system today and the development of our future transportation system. And I'll hand it over to Denise for the next slide, please.
So during the strategic business plan implementation efforts, we discovered that as an agency, we had a gap. we have no single person with cross-organizational responsibility for data as an asset like we do for technology. We aren't the only state DOT to have come to this conclusion. And so this role was identified as one of the key leaders, along with the CIO, for the tech and data governance efforts. Jerri and I have been doing what we can to stand in for this position and to focus initially on the cross-organizational responsibilities represented by those two top boxes, specifically putting in place the new governance elements because they are foundational, and digital innovation, including policy work and preparation for connected and autonomous vehicles, new data integration resources such as Redundancy, and developing ways to enhance data-related workforce capabilities. I have, however, been authorized to say that agency leadership is currently giving this position serious thought. Next slide. We've also been formalizing other tech and data roles, both to create known networks of resources across the organization and to clarify who has what responsibilities. Most of these roles have existed in some form in at least parts of the organization. For instance, data owners and system owners may be terms that you're familiar with, but we're changing the name to trustees to help us break down silos and better reflect that we are entrusted with resources or assets that actually belong to citizens of the state. The only entirely new role is that of coordinating data stewards. This role will create a point person to help the network of data trustees and stewards have someone that understands their line of business and is at least somewhat familiar with their work and concerns. The coordinating data steward can then translate top-down guidance coming from the governance processes in a meaningful way, and are also a mechanism, just one though, there are others, for communicating from the front line back to the governance bodies. We're working with each major part of the organization to help them identify who is playing these roles now or should be. Next slide. In addition, soon we will have a new agency-wide approach to surfacing and prioritizing data and technology projects. Implicit is the expectation that these areas of the organization, right, sub-areas of the organization, will have development, innovation, or modernization plans and align ideas and proposals to those plans, agency priorities, or state and federal mandates, all of which will act as a filtering mechanism, both for getting management support initially and prioritization at the end of the process. Again, because the individual parts of this organization approach project selection and prioritization differently right now, we will be providing to each major part of the organization that wants it some personalization to work through what implementing this process would look like for them. Next slide. To help us be more effective as an organization and to support the new agency-wide project prioritization process, we're putting together mechanisms, aka tools, to help show what resources already exist, what projects are in flight, and what has already been proposed. We're also developing a series of data literacy modules to support people across the organization with data-related responsibilities. Next slide. So what's in it for you? Hopefully you're already imagining some of the ways your work might benefit, but in case you aren't, we're calling out a few. Once everything is in place, you'll be able to quickly find the decision makers, subject matter experts, and data you need. By reducing project redundancy, whether it's a data project or technology project, because even though we didn't talk about it directly, we don't have those beautiful Gartner pieces to support it. We also have more data projects than we have capacity for. But by focusing on priorities, reducing redundancy, we create more capacity for agency innovation. Understanding roles and responsibilities better, like who's responsible for training to new technologies and data resources, will help us get from initial investment to effective use of those investments faster. Next slide. So what's next? the creation of mechanisms to communicate both the tech and data governance efforts, but also to help share cross-organizationally other related efforts and innovations occurring throughout the organization. The finalization and rollout of new information resources, right? Some of those tools we were talking about, the roles, the project prioritization process, and of course the continuing personalization work to help business lines transition smoothly. Next slide. And finally, just a reminder that like many other agency efforts, the ultimate goal of this work is to be intentional about creating processes and mechanisms that allow us to proactively meet the demands of an evolving transportation agency. Thank you, and I will hand it off now to Sally for questions.
Jill, our moderator, will now take your questions through Slido. Jill, you're muted. Okay, while Jill gets unmuted, I will go ahead and ask the first question. So the first question is, how do we convince legislators to commit resources and money for technology upgrades funded by indirect budgets when they're so focused on STIP project photo ops?
I can't see any frustration associated with that question. But, you know, I would say is, first thing is to show results. I look at, and I'm the new guy here, but I look at the workload for the technology side, and I see really three big muscle movements. The first one is application modernization. The second one is execution on the strategic business plan, which really means, you know, putting those applications like Workday and TAMS, I know it's everybody's favorite tool, but Oregon buys and many of the other sort of applications that we need to run our business. And then the third muscle movement is the strategic action plan, which has really large multi-year projects. And clearly from the slide that Thomas showed, we don't have a lot of capacity internally to take on additional work. And so this is one where, number one is we need to do a good job with the work that we're doing. But we also need to market ourselves so that our agency leadership understands where those bottlenecks are, and then to work with the legislators in order to make sure that they understand that and resource us to be able to do more. And that's a challenge.
And, you know, I think what I would add is you heard Denise talk a little bit, I think it was 2 sessions ago, where they passed legislation that talked about wanting some consistency with our data portal. That same session, they also passed, I can't remember the name of the legislation, but it made our statewide GIS actually a legislative committee or appointed by the governor with the state agencies. So there's really, I think, become a recognition at the legislative side of the need to become a little bit more efficient and more consistent with how we think both, I think, data and technology. And I think to Mark's point, we're all getting better as state agencies to show the business case, which I think was the next step. And quite honestly, I think with the work that we've done on the governance and the optimization, we're at that place where we can make the business case of what does it take to do better with regards to tech and data. And, you know, they have recognized, and I realize in a way it's the STIP, but they're very, the legislature is very supportive of the tolling. And they've had a legislative commission around connected and automated vehicles, and they recognize that that's new technology and data. So they're, it's probably inching, but they're moving in that direction. So it's not completely unknown to them is how I would end it, so.
Okay, thank you, Jerri. I'm sorry about that. I apologize for that long silence. I had a little technical difficulty. So the next question is, are the new roles going to be added responsibilities for existing positions or completely new solicitations?
I'll take that one. So as I mentioned, many these roles already exist in some form across in many parts of the organization. And so they're already parts of lots of people's jobs, maybe just not explicitly called out in the way they are now and not with a consistent cross-organizational view of them. That doesn't mean that nobody would get any new responsibilities, right, or think about their jobs a little bit differently. I think that's possible. I think the other thing I want to reflect back is that as we start passing along some additional expectations, right, for how we govern or manage data as an organization, we're going to be thoughtful not to ever do it just for its own sake, right, but to do it in order to help us meet business needs more quickly and more effectively. So hopefully there'll be some trade-offs there that happen in terms of some of the other things that are being provided as a part of this process that help make that work easier in addition to that. So I hope that answers it. So it's not going to be...
What I'd add, Denise, is that as we work through these roles and we identified them at the division level, I know Denise and others have been around to your division administrators a couple of times talking about the roles, trying to understand the implications for the division. So your management staff clearly understands this, so they're not, I would say, being blindsided by this, and were really thoughtful about what the implications were to their division as they went through this. So this isn't something that's surprising them. So.
Yeah, to echo what Jerri is saying, we really have been talking about this for years. So by the time the management teams for the divisions are starting to identify their people, they've really been hearing about this and thinking about it and knowing that at least this kind of more standard view of what people are doing was coming.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, what efforts are taking place to increase staffing with support staff to be able to adequately support the agency with the increasing focus on technology?
So I'll address that a little bit. Is clearly, again, being the new guy on board, is I've been trying to take an assessment of ISB and where there are bottlenecks associated with that. And quite frankly, one of the things that I hope to kick off next month is a staffing assessment that is looking at the completion of the STP in DMV, but we have a fortunate opportunity to gain a number of permanent positions in the next biennium. And I want the assessment to look across each of the dedicated service delivery groups to make sure that we are addressing our staffing more specifically for the immediate need. And then we'll hopefully be looking sometime later this year or maybe early next year to start developing more a cross-functional look within the ISB with a broader staffing assessment to look at skills as we switch our software portfolio from custom-built applications to commercial off-the-shelf, is that our skill mix has to change. So, there's, from those assessments and understanding more deliberately where we need to strengthen and beef up our staffing, then I would anticipate being able to take that to the leadership so that we can start to work through those problems.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, have we considered a statewide unit available to code macros, improve database efficiencies, and general computer programming tools like GIS and the Forms group?
I guess I'll take that one. And I think the answer to that is probably more of a no than a yes. So the question is that a good idea or something that should be pursued? And I think that it's at least a good enough comment to pursue and see if there's some places where statewide teams could either generate some efficiencies or have some knowledge sharing that makes sense. I think that a lot of places where we see inside IS, there is some cross-agency sharing, especially when there's calls for help or pleas for help or something like that. But there isn't anything that is structured in a domain space. And, you know, things like even here within ODOT, we do struggle with, for instance, PowerShell scripts, right? We want to have a standard place for those and treat those as code and have the repositories for those be structured. And those are challenges just at an agency level, let alone at an enterprise level. But I'll take that question as a good idea, so to speak, and we can maybe see if other groups in ODOT have success in that front that could be duplicated.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, go ahead. I was
No,
just,
go ahead.
I was going to add, Jill. So I was just going to add that we are also, you know, working on sort of more literacy right around databases cross-organizationally. So there's that piece of it too.
Thank you. All right, the next question is, how can we leverage the enterprise data warehouse as the agency's go-to for centralized reports rather than various business all creating their own reports?
Yeah, one of the challenges is even within our data warehouse, there are lots of reports and we don't have a good inventory or library of them. So we're well aware, I would say, of the need, in addition to having a data inventory or a data catalog for the organization, starting to have a way to identify what reports are already in place, visualizations, that type of thing, so that, again, we're not creating redundant efforts there. And so people are thinking about that. I don't know that we have a solution yet, but when we get to having the website up, right, for tech and data, where we talk about things as they evolve, hopefully we'll provide some thoughts there about what's occurring, but there'll also be an opportunity, I think, to flag issues that you want people to pay attention to as well, that are cross-organizational and cross-cutting like that.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, ODOT struggles to keep enterprise asset inventories up to date. When/how do we decide to make the leap to broader open source data formats like OpenStreetMap?
Who wants that?
Jerri.
I don't know that I want that. Where's Brian Dunn when I need him? You know, I think that is something that actually we continue to have conversations about, is what is the best way from an efficiency standpoint of where we collect our data. So you heard, I think, Denise talk about RIDIS, which gets us to some of our traffic, you know, speed information that's going along in our highways. We recognize that there's a lot of efficiencies and consistencies with regards to that. We also recognize that because it's a contract that we actually have with the University of Maryland, that they have some folks that can do the analytics that we don't necessarily have staffing for. So I think, I don't have an answer for OpenStreet right now, but I think we're recognizing that, just like Mark talked about the cloud and getting stuff from, you know, using stuff that's sort of off the shelf, that there's a lot of advantages to doing that. And I think as we get better at this, those are the types of things that we're going to be asking ourselves, is that the best way to do things? But it does have some implications, right? Because our GIS right now is the foundation for a lot of work. And when you just grab OpenStreet, there's a lot of work associated with that. So it's not just a a simple, flip the switch type of thing. So I think that is something under discussion. I think we're a little ways out before we figure out which is the most efficient thing on those types of data.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what can business managers who manage self-built data warehouses do to support integrating data?
Come to the data steering team.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of things, right? So we're working right now on collecting information, right, for our data inventory and eventually a catalog. So as we're doing that, right, surfacing, right, that those are happening, which would be helpful for us and help us evaluate redundancy with other things that other people are doing once that listserv emerges. And then we're the data steering team, like Mark was suggesting, on standardization, right? Because integration gets easier and when we have some master data management or some reference data management, right? So there'll be lots of opportunities, I think, to help us get more efficient at this.
Okay, great. The next question is, as the governance structure continues to roll out, how will the changes and expectations get communicated?
So I think there'll be a number of mechanisms, right? So we're looking at a newsletter, right? We've got coordinating data stewards who will communicate some things to data stewards and data trustees. We have, the intranet site. So there'll be ways to push and pull information, but in terms of changing expectations, we're really going to work through some of those roles that we identified, right, to disseminate some of that information to the people that are impacted most.
And I would add to that is we have representation on the Tech and Data Council, as well as representation in both the steering teams, which is what I consider to be is the primary vehicle for communicating with the business, on top of the communications that I might have on one-on-ones with division administrators and things like that, as well as Jerri and Denise in their communications as well. I have taken the approach on the steering teams that we welcome folks that have interests that may not be on the steering team to come in as guests to be able to present issues or solutions that they're seeking so that we can consider those and further formulate them into something that is a tool that works for us. I have long taken the approach in terms of governance that is how we align to the business. All of what ISB does is in support of business operations, right? The day-to-day business that folks outside of IT do. And we provide tools and technology to support the accomplishment of those business requirements. So it's not really about IT, it's not about data, it's about serving the organization so that we solve your needs.
And Mark, the other thing I would add is that the representation on our Tech and Data Council, which Mark and I co-chair, has representation from each of the divisions, right? And actually in the case of delivery and operations, a little bit more extensive because of the difference between maintenance and project delivery and so on. Any of those types of initiatives and efforts will be coming to them because there's, I think, a recognition that this will, excuse me, I thought I turned this off. That there's a recognition that there's a culture change that has to happen here. And we want to make sure that we work with the divisions to do that. And we also know that as we get better at this, and we've talked about this and we have a little bit of a communication strategy. So we recognize it's going to be important to bring this, the conversations that I've had with Denise is that we have to really kind of do this two ways. One is to bring it from down below, because a lot of the folks that work on the data, they're the staff that really hold the agency together, right? And then we've got to convince leadership about why this is important. So we really see the communication having to come both from the bottom up and the top down, and hopefully we'll have something good in the middle. So that's how I think about it anyway.
Okay, thank you. We just have a couple minutes left. So this is the next question. How do we collaborate with other agencies or public entities to save money and resources, support standardization, increase system redundancy, resilience, and transparency?
So let me start by saying is that I participate in a state CIO Council on a monthly basis where all of the CIOs across the agencies have an opportunity to meet. In many cases, there's a formalized agenda with some topics that and presentations that different agencies provide, mostly for awareness. And then at the end of the sort of scheduled activities, even DAS, EIS, who sponsors this thing, goes away, leaving all just the agency CIOs to have a roundtable discussion for about 60 minutes. And we've in fact talked about some of these efforts. You know, I'm sure most folks that have had a project that had to go through StageGate get really frustrated with that process and the administrivia associated with just getting projects approved and things like that add quite a bit of overhead to any project. But we've talked about on some projects, for example, e-signature projects, which are pretty straightforward. Other agencies have done them, is to provide some of the paperwork that they had to submit so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And I'd say the only challenge that gets in the way of us doing more of that is that we all have our individual day jobs and we all have our individual issues within the agencies that maybe precludes us from coordinating more than what we currently do.
On the data side, there's probably two great examples. One is the Oregon Geographic Information Council that's actually been around for quite a number of years, and all of the sort of what we call the framework layers of GIS are really something that are done across the state agencies, right? So they've worked that for a long time. They actually have a portal that they work with the university. So from a GIS standpoint, we've done a whole lot to try to be, I think, more efficient and probably to be consistent with the data in one way. And it is also ones where we work with the counties as well, because there's a lot of information that we get from the cities and counties, primarily from the counties. So that's been, like I said, going on for, I've been with the agency 22 years, and I know for at least 15 plus years that's been going on. And then more recently with the DAS, with the state having their chief data officer, she also has an advisory committee, of which I am a member of, and the idea is for us to be more consistent with how we think about what's the data we want to include, what does that look like. And in fact, we're actively involved in at least one pilot that I know of, because Denise is on that, to gain some efficiencies there. So there's a lot that is happening, I think, across the state agencies to figure out how to do this quicker and better and cheaper.
Okay, well, we are out of time. So I would like to thank all of our presenters and all of you for attending, and I wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you.